and welcome to lesson number 5 on our fiction unit. The text that we are addressing here is Letha White from your fiction unit booklet. Again, you need to have that ready to go before you start the lesson. If you haven't got it, pause the video, go grab that now. Anyone that hasn't got access to that, if you go to my channel and look at lesson number 1, you will see that in the description that I have posted a link to those files so you can open up the file and access the booklet through that as well. Okay, and anyone here who has not watched lessons 1 to 4, you need to go back and check those out first because I build up the skills ready for this point. So you must watch them in the correct order to be ready to answer the right tasks. Okay, let's get going then, people. So, first things first, title. Title, as you can see on the screen there, is question 3, structure. And the reason that we are working through these questions in the order that we are is we are using the prototype of what they will give you at GCSE. So when you come to sit your language GCSE, they will give you an unseen extract. That means an extract from a story that you will likely never have seen before. And the questions that they will ask you, whilst we don't know the specific wording of those questions, what we do know is the rough formula that they follow. We can tell you already that question 1 will ask you to identify 4 things. We know that question number 2 will be asking you to look at the language and the methods that a writer is using and the sentence structures that they're using. Question 3 will always be on structure. Now, in our other questions, we've had specific lines from the text that we've had to look at to form our basis of our analysis. But today, question number 3 is about the whole of the extract. So in today's lesson, we will be rereading the whole of the extract and we will be looking at the way that the extract has been structured and developed in order to build up that sense of the crime genre. Okay? So go grab your extracts now and then we're going to go over your objectives for today's lesson. Right, okay, so objectives coming at you. We've got to analyse the structure of the extract and writer's reasons for structuring the extract this way. Of course, we know that the writer in question here is Robert Galbraith, which is the pen name or the pseudonym of J.K. Rowling. We're also going to be looking at identifying and analysing what we call shifts. And that basically means the changes in focus in the extract and to explore the writer's intentions. Okay, so those are your objectives and we will revisit these at the end of the lesson to check that you feel that you've understood these. Right, so time for a starter and your challenge. So a relatively simple starter. Do you like my Lego people in the background building a house? Now that kind of image of building is actually something which we will be talking about in terms of how a writer structures a text. They build and they construct, much like my little workers in Lego are doing here. So for your starter, I'm going to ask you a question which is about the structure of a story. What do we mean by the structure of a story? And what do most stories include? And so you will see there that I have blanked out the letters in the words that you could use to complete that sentence. I'm sure you have already figured out what those words would be. 3 words that might explain the structure of a story. Write down your answers now, pause the video, and then we will go through the rather obvious answers. Right, so time for the answers. Again, green pen this please, so grab your green pens. So this is obvious. The answers would be a beginning, middle and end. Now we know that that is the traditional formula of any classic story that we expect to see those, but today we're going to be questioning what do those look like, how does a writer use them, and how do you do it well. Also, because we are going to be looking at an extract rather than a whole narrative today, we're going to be applying the same understanding of the structure of a whole story to how you would analyse a specific moment from within a story as you would have in your GCSE exam. And we're going to use our extract from Letha White to model that. Okay, so time for the challenge. Why do you think structure matters? So have a think about this. why is it that the structure of a story might be significant and important? For example, what makes a poorly structured story? I'm going to ask you to now jot down your ideas about this. So take approximately 3 minutes, and you can mind map or bullet point your answers to this. Okay, so answer time. Now, this is subjective, what you think makes a well structured narrative. I mean, personally, I'm going to share some of my ideas, and you can feel free to add any of the ideas that I've come up with that are different from yours in green pen so that you have a more thorough understanding. Okay, so one of the things that I think makes a poorly structured narrative would be a narrative where there is no development, whether that's of a character. We sometimes refer to it as like a character arc, meaning that we see a shift and change and development in a character. So if we think of classic literature, things like To Kill a Mockingbird, we see that the character who narrates the story in that is a little girl called Scout. And in the course of the story, she grows, she changes, she learns things about the world that she's in. Or if we compare to a text that you guys know really well, if we think about a series of unfortunate events, if you think about the characters of like Klaus, Sunny, and Violet, you can see that their characters shift and learn and develop as the narrative goes on. And I think for me, a poorly structured narrative would be one where we do not encounter the same character arc. We don't see a journey or development of the character. So for me, that would be a big one. Other things I think that would create a poorly structured narrative would be a story in which there is no physical progress either. So there's no shifting of scene, of setting, or tone or atmosphere. And I think that those shifts, those important changes in a narrative, give a plot momentum. They give it like pace. It moves forward. It reaches a conclusion. And I think that's so significant for well-written stories have a really good trajectory. They move from a moment of maybe tragedy to a moment of optimism or vice versa. Okay, so why does structure matter? Because we read for a purpose. We read because we want to be taken on a journey. We want to understand the world that's been created for us. And I think personally, I read to learn more about being human and about what it's like to experience the world. So if a story doesn't take me somewhere and I don't learn something from it, then I would consider it to be poorly structured. So I think the whole point of structure is to take us on that journey, to help us to realise something or to feel something new about the world that's been created for us. Okay, right, using some of the ideas that I've given you, so the use of a journey, the use of character development, the kind of moral movement of a story, and the learning that can take place for the reader. So we are going to start with the diagram here first before we move over and do that bit over. So we're going to have a look at this diagram in front of us now. I have a feeling we have actually already looked at this in class, but it's worth me going over it for any of you who weren't there or are not sure. So this is what we call a classic story structure. All right, sometimes referred to as Freytag's pyramid, and I might have shown you a picture of a roller coaster to exemplify this sort of movement of a classic story. So we refer to the opening or the starting point of a story often as at the beginning, but a nicer word and a more technical word in English for that would be your exposition. This is the same as you will encounter in drama as well. I know that we teach you there as well that the starting point is your exposition. So it's just a more technical word for the beginning or the opening. Typically, we then go on a rising action, which means that we encounter some sort of events and movement and change in the plot. And we arrive at our climax. So your climax is like your moment of high tension. So your moment where something tense or dramatic is happening. Following that, we encounter falling action, which is the movement towards our conclusion or denouement here. I'm afraid my French is appalling, so please don't expect me to pronounce that right. Sav, I'm sure you're going to correct me on this. So your denouement is your concluding point. And This is literally the untying of the plot. It's where the pieces of string that have formed the narrative so far all kind of come apart. We see the working of the plot. We reach our logical concluding point. So typically a story follows this pattern. So exposition, climax, denouement. And I'm going to ask you now to have a look at this side of slide over here. I'm going to look at Lethal White. We're going to reread it, and I'm going to read it to you. And as I read it, I want you to be trying to think of an answer to this question. What part of the story do you think that this extract is from? So as I read it, are we looking at the opening, the exposition of a story, the climax or moment of highest tension in a story, or the denouement, the conclusion of a story? If you wish to be more specific and, for example, say you think it's somewhere between the exposition and the rising action, or between the climax and falling action, feel free to add that in, okay? So you're going to need to make those notes as I now read you the extract. Okay, so just to remind you, as I'm reading this, I'm asking you what part of the structure of the story, the overall story, you think this comes from. Do you think it comes from the exposition, the climax, or the denouement? So as I read, you need to be thinking about that, and I need reasons for that too. So you need to just jot down some answers as I read to you now. So panting, his right knee aching, Strike used the handrail to pull himself up the last few steps of the metal staircase leading to his office. Two raised voices were reverberating through the glass door, one male, the other shrill, frightened and female. When Strike burst into the room, Denise, who was backed against the wall, gasped, "Oh, thank God!" Strike judged the man in the middle of the room to be in his mid-20s. Dark hair fell in straggly wisps around a thin and dirty face that was dominated by burning, sunken eyes. His t-shirt, jeans and hoodie were all torn and filthy. The sole of one of his trainers peeling away from the leather. An unwashed animal stench hit the detective's nostrils. That the stranger was mentally ill could be in no doubt. Every 10 seconds or so, and what seemed to be an uncontrollable tick, he touched first the end of his nose, which had grown red with repeated tapping, then, with a faint, hollow thud, the middle of his thin sternum, then let his hand drop to his side. Almost immediately, his hand would fly to the tip of his nose again. It was as though he had forgotten how to cross himself, or had simplified the action for speed's sake. Nose, chest, hand at his side. Nose, chest, hand at his side. The mechanical movement was distressing to watch, and the more so as he seemed barely conscious that he was doing it. He was one of those ill and desperate people you saw in the capital, who were always somebody else's problem, like the traveller on the tube everybody tries to avoid making eye contact with, and the ranting woman on the street corner whom people cross the street to avoid. Fragments of shattered humanity, who were too common to trouble the imagination for long. "You him?" said the burning-eyed man as his hand touched nose and chest again. "You Strike? You the detective?" Okay, guys, so obviously this is the only part of the text that we have to work with, and we're not told anything else about what will happen in the narrative. Your first job then is to write down where you think that comes from. Is that from the beginning of the novel, do you think, the middle, or the end? And we're trying to use the technical words for those, so instead of beginning, you're opting for exposition. Instead of middle, you're saying climax, and end, you're using denouement. Okay, so spelling of those words is back on the previous slide. Rewind if you need to check any of those. Right, answer your task now. I'm just going to move myself. There we go. Now we can actually read what's on the screen. So this is what your question 3 looks like. You can have a look at it now in your fiction booklet. So skip 3, find question 3. We're going to read through the question together first, and then I'm going to go through the metacognition skills. So remember, that means like thinking about your thinking. So trying to work out the best approach to the question, understanding how to answer a question really effectively. So here we go. This is your question. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes his focus as the source develops, any other structural features that interest you. Okay? Now, even though the question is using words like beginning, in your answer, you need to use the technical terms that I have taught you. So instead of beginning, you would use the word exposition. Instead of middle, you would use climax, etc. Okay? So I'm expecting you to be using the terminology that you were acquiring during the lesson. Right, so having looked at the question and the bullet points, remember that when in an exam you get a phrase like you could write about, let's get my highlighter out here for you, this actually means you must write about. Examiners are couching it with could, but this is an instruction. You have to write about what happens at the start of our extract, how it changes, so what shifts happen, and anything that you can see in the structure that might be there deliberately with a specific purpose in mind. So before we look at the extract again, and you'll be rereading that on your own, you're going to be underlining the keywords in this question. So I've highlighted there for you what those keywords are. We've got structure, and of course we're looking at the whole text, not just specific lines here. Beginning, change, focus, and structural features. So you're copying my highlighting down onto your analysis. Then for the second bullet point, we are going to be looking at these individual bullet points and using them to guide us through our reading and through our answering of the question. So when we write about structure, we are following the bullet points. Effectively, if you were to plan out an answer that was like a paragraph on each bullet point, you'd be heading in the right direction with your answers here. Okay, so I'm going to now talk to you about how we analyse it, and I will meet you on the next slide to do that. Get yourselves ready. Okay, so when you're thinking about analysing the structure of an extract like the one from Legal Whites, there are two really easy ways that you can go about working out what the structure is. The first option that I'm going to talk you through is on the slide here, and it's to storyboard the extract. Now, storyboard is what they use when they make film, and it's to basically break down the key moments or the key scenes into visual form, or to separate out the key moments so that you can see the overarching pattern and structure of the narrative. So I've got for you here a kind of map out of each paragraph. So we've got like paragraph 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then below it sentence starters to help you work out what the main focus or the driving kind of agenda of each paragraph is. So have a look at that now. So we are going to work out together how we could complete those sentence starters in a moment. So I said that there were two significant ways that you could work out what the overarching structure is. The first way is to storyboard it like this. The second version, for anyone that's a real visual learner and who enjoys using like image to help them recall or to kind of work out visually what's happening in each paragraph, is to draw it and summarise it. So you can choose whichever method you prefer. So storyboarding we're going to do using sentence starters instead of pictures, or you can draw it if you prefer. So choose a method that works best for you now. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the sentence starters that are here. So we're going to look at paragraph 1 again, and I want you to think about how you could finish that sentence. So what is happening in paragraph 1? You're going to complete the sentence, Strike arrives. So you need to tell me where Strike is and what seems to be happening in paragraph 1 as we look back at that now. Okay, so here's paragraph 1. And we are going to think about how we could explain what's happening. Strike arrives, going to finish that sentence. So we know that at this point he is panting, his right knee aching. Strike used the handrail to pull himself up the last few steps of the metal staircase, leading to his office. So we know that we could be finishing off that sentence by saying that he's arriving at his office, where two raised voices were reverberating through the glass door, one male, the other shrill, frightened, and female. Okay, so a simple way to summarise what's happening then in paragraph 1 is that Strike is arriving at his office, where there are two people that he can hear within clearly shouting at each other, because we know that there are raised voices, meaning people are shouting. So we know that one is male and that the other is female. Okay, and your job now is going to be to complete that sentence starter there. So Strike arrives at his office where he can hear two people shouting, one male, one female. An answer like that would suffice. I'm going to give you less help on the others, and I'm going to ask you to have a go at doing those yourself now. So try and complete the same process for number 2, number 3, and number 4. If you fall into the camp of preferring visual and drawing, then you need to draw out for each paragraph what you think is happening. Sadly, I'm not able to show you my artwork. I know you know that I love my art, but I'm not able to do it in live time and show you on here. You may be grateful for that. So you are welcome to do that if you so wish. It's a bit more artistic. Okay, have a go at completing that task now. Right guys, okay, you should have now completed tasks T3 and 4, so on paragraphs T3 and 4, using the sentence starters or drawing what you can see in each of those paragraphs. So we're working out what the focus of each of the paragraphs is, analysing it using these sentence starters or drawing. I'm going to now talk you through what the answers could have been. You need to grab your green pen and get ready to annotate. So, paragraph 2. We know that the sentence starter I gave you was he sees the man. When I say he, I am referring to Strike. So Strike sees a man. We're now going to have a look at that extract and talk through what you could have said to finish that. Okay, so one of the things that you could have said to finish that was he sees the man who appears to be in his mid-20s in the middle of the room. We know that he is described in a way that makes him seem unkempt. That means not well looked after. So he's got dark hair, falling in straggly wisps, dirty face, sunken eyes, t-shirt, jeans and hoodie all torn and filthy, and his trainers feeling away from the leather. You don't need to list every single detail of what happens. What you need to do is work out what the main focus for the writer is. So in my answer I would say that he sees the man in the middle of the room. The man is made to appear to seem filthy and dirty and not well looked after. He also smells vile. Okay, that's enough. Right, so paragraph 3 now, and we know that you are completing this, so Strike thinks about, and we're going to answer that now. Right, so the main focus of this paragraph, paragraph number 3, is the behaviour and the movements of the man in the middle of the room. So I would say that Strike thinks about the bizarre behaviour of the man in the middle of the room. Okay, that would be enough. You're explaining what the focus is. We know this because it explains how he's got this really weird mechanical movement of touching his nose to his chest. It's almost like he's crossing himself, but it's gone wrong. Okay, so we know that that's the main focus. At the end of the paragraph, it tells us that he seems to be somebody who one would try to avoid if they saw them, because we wouldn't know how to respond to them. Okay, but you don't need to list every single point. You need a general gist of what's going on. So if we think about our sentence starter, Strike thinks about the bizarre behaviour of the man in the middle of the room. Anything that you got that kind of captures that would it'll be an easy one to answer. The man asks, we don't even need to look back to answer this. We know what he asks. He asks whether he is Strike. So he clearly doesn't recognise Strike as a character, but he's heard of him. He wants to ascertain whether the man he's talking to is the right man, Strike. So the man asks whether this is Strike. Simple one. Right, having done that, you have now mapped out what the writer is doing in terms of structure. You now know how the writer is developing the extract to focus on different things in different paragraphs. The whole point of a paragraph is to give it a specific focus. So every time you shift to a new paragraph in your creative writing, you are changing your paragraph to tell your reader, I'm now going to describe you a new character or a new moment or a new emotion or setting, etc. So it always marks a change in what's happening in action or on focus. Okay, and what you've now done is work out how this writer is moving the focus, a bit like a video camera. If we were filming the extract, how different shots would be constructed on different focuses. Writers work in the same way that a cinematographer, that's somebody who makes and shoots a film, works. So they're thinking about what to focus the reader's eye on at specific moments, and you've now mapped that out. So I'm going to now talk to you about how we think about answering. Okay, so I'm going to kind of try and illustrate for you the idea of shifts, so changes. A shift means a change, and every paragraph a writer uses is creating some kind of shift or change for us as a reader, and it directs our eye or our reader's eye and focus. Now I'm going to try and illustrate this for you using a clip from Baz Luhrmann's version of Romeo and Juliet. So it's set to like a modern setting rather than Shakespearean, but they're still using Shakespearean style language here. So bear with that. I want you to not get caught up in the language that's being used here, but in the shifts and changes that you can see are happening visually on the screen. I'm going to pause the video at moments and talk you through what a shift looks like, and then we're going to apply our understanding of this to your analysis of the extract from Luther White.
Here comes of the House of Capulet. Coral, I will back thee.
Okay, so at the starting point or exposition of our story here, what Baz Luhrmann shows us, and he's the director here, is a real close-up at the start of the main character who's going to be leading this scene. And we can see the shift between him and these oppositional characters. So the two gangs in Romeo and Juliet, two family groups, Capulet versus Montague, and it's as if you've got two at war gangs here who are conflicting over basically whose turf it is, whose right it is. So in the extract that you're watching brought onto screen here, we can see the shifts between the two groups. So what we're seeing on the screen right now is the Montague family, and the man that we saw at the start was the Capulet.
I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it. Huh?
Okay, and I'm going to pause it there for you. So the action of the Montague boys by biting their thumb, it's seen as an aggressive action. It'd be the equivalent of making a re-gesture today. And the shift in focus is in the tone and atmosphere at this point. So by making an aggressive action, by biting his thumb, we see a change or a shift happen in the mood of the extract. Suddenly things become much more tense, aggressive. We get the sense that action is about to happen. This is the same method that a writer would use in their writing. If we get an indication of a shift in mood, that is still a shift that is worth analysing. Why is the writer structuring that shift, that movement in the tone and atmosphere? Okay?
Go forth, I will back thee! Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir! Do you bite your thumb at us? Sir. Is the law of our side if I say aye? No! No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir! Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, son? No, sir! Sir! But if you do, sir, and for you I serve as good a man as you! No better? Here comes our kinsman. Say better! Yes, sir, but you lie! Two of you be mad! Poor fools, you know not what you do!
Okay, so again, another shift is an introduction of a new character. So we get the introduction of a new character for a new shift in the direction of the piece here. And all of these shifts are things that you're going to be looking for in our extracts. It's also really good to experience a text that you'll look at later with Romeo and Juliet. I'm not going to show you anything unsuitable, obviously, here. It's a great film, but it is above the certification for you to go and watch now. The extract I'm showing you is all PG, so please don't worry about that. But I wouldn't recommend that you go and watch the actual film at this stage. So what you can see is that the director has used shifts from mood to tone to character focus throughout this piece. We're going to now transfer our understanding of that in film to what we will see in Lethal White. Okay, so the questions I'm going to pose for you now are here. The first task is one that everyone should attempt. If you want more challenge, you need to be stretched more. You're going to try the second one. Okay, so you will need to do your task as well, but you'll move on and also do the challenge. If you find the task really hard, just stick with the task as it is, don't attempt the challenge. So the task is to summarise how the writer shifts focus in the story. And if you are up for the challenge, I'm going to ask you what the effect of the shifts are. So what is the point in changing focus? Now, at the start of the lesson, we talked about the fact that a good narrative or a good structure to a story shows shifts, shows development, and whether that's of a character and their learning, or whether that is of the events and action within the plot. Okay, so when you're answering that challenge about what is the point of changing focus, one of the things that you can talk about is the journey of a text. The fact that every text you read is intended to take you on some sort of journey, whether that is a literal journey that a character undertakes or whether it's a moral journey. There is still a journey happening. Right then, so we're going to try and unpick what the structural shifts are here. You should have now had a go at breaking down what the shifts are that happen in this extract. And if you're stuck, look back at your storyboarding of it and think about how the shifts are happening. Okay, so check your answers for that now. If you haven't done that yet, pause the video here. Okay, so we're now going to talk through answers that you could have come up with. Obviously, our storyboard answers mark the shifts that occur, but if we had to simplify it into the basic shifts that we see at work, we're going to talk through some of the things you might have noticed. So, at the starting point here, we have a focus on the character of Strike. He is our major focal point, and we see him arriving at the office. So this is a scene setting paragraph. It's character setting and it's scene setting that we're seeing happening here. Okay, so your focus for your starting point for your paragraph is scene setting, character setting. We're getting an impression of what's going on. We also get an impression of some sort of conflict that's happened with the shrill, frightened female and the gasp of, oh, thank God. In short, what is the writer doing? They are using what we call a narrowing narration. So we see a focusing in on Strike as a character. You think of something narrowing in, you're getting that real specific focus on the key character of Strike here. Okay, so let's move on, look at paragraph 2. We've got Strike judged the man in the middle. Okay, and we get this description of what the man looks like. This is furthering and narrowing narration, but it has shifted. Instead of a focus specifically on Strike and what he's doing and where he is, we're seeing a focus on the man in the middle of the room. So it goes from Strike as the main character to the man in the middle of the room, and that's your key shift. Another key shift that you can then see has happened is that we have moved from outside to inside. So we've got the outer picture of Strike arriving at the office versus paragraph 2, a shift to inside the office and the man who is within. Paragraph 3 focuses in even more. So this process of narrowing narration, it's as if it zoomed in a little bit on Strike, then shifted to the character of the man in the middle of the room, and now it's really homing in on who he is, okay, and what he looks like and how he's behaving. All right, so the major shift into paragraph 3 is the behaviour. It's almost like we've got this camera zooming in on the man in the middle of the room and how he's behaving, okay? Major shift of paragraph 4 is to dialogue. So we hear the character talking. Up to this point, we're hearing kind of like the voice of the sort of omnipotent narrator, a kind of godlike figure that seems to know everything about the narration. But in paragraph 4, the major shift here is into the speech of the characters. So we hear characters talking, we get an impression that the burning-eyed man in the middle of the room is not just a figure, but a thinking being with intent to communicate with Strike. So for your task, when you are summarising how the writer shifts focus, you could say that the writer shifts from outside and the focus on Strike as a major character to the new introduction of a character in paragraph 2 of the man in the middle of the room, to a narrowing in narration onto the character's behaviour in paragraph 3. Finally, the writer shifts from the omnipotent narrative perspective. Omnipotent is that all-knowing, all-seeing perspective, a kind of godlike figure of the narrator who knows what's going on in the scene, to the dialogue between the man in the middle of the room and he's speaking out towards Strike. Okay, so final shift is to dialogue for the man in the middle of the room. Okay, now to think about the challenge, what is the effect of these structural shifts? What is the point in changing focus? What do we think the point was then, people? From moving from the character of Strike arriving at his office to the man in the middle of the room, to the man in the middle of the room behaving weirdly, to the man in the middle of the room starting to speak. Why does the writer break it up into a sequence of moments like that in succession? Have a think now, jot down some ideas and come back for the answers. Pause the video. Okay, so some of the things that you might have said is that by focusing in stages, sort of narrowing in on this character of the man in the middle of the room, the writer is building up tension and mystery about this figure of the man in the middle of the room, and that develops suspense. So it makes us anticipate what kind of character this is and what might happen between him and the character we were first introduced to of Strike. So you can say that the writer deliberately narrows in on the focus of a character in the middle of the room, and she does that in a series of paragraphs, one after the other, building up to the moment of that character finally speaking. Okay, and the reason she's doing that is to build tension and suspense. Okay, people, I've moved down here now. So for this task, I'm going to expect you to work through this one without as much support from me. I've taught you how a writer structures it. I'm now going to talk you through how you answer this task. You need to copy out onto a piece of paper or into your book this table. So you need 3 boxes down the side. So we've got beginning, middle and ends. Can you put below them the technical terms here? So beginning, we're using exposition, middle, climax, end, denouement. Now that structure you can apply to an extract as well as a whole novel or a whole story, okay? So when we talk about our extract, we're going to talk about the first paragraph as the exposition, your middle paragraph, so I'd call that paragraph 3 in our extract, as your climax, and your denouement is your final paragraph, paragraph 4. Along the top, you need to have narrative perspective, character, event, setting, and atmosphere as your categories. Okay? So draw your table up now. You will not need to write in every box. I'm going to explain to you what you will be writing in each box in a second. Copy the table down now and pause the video and meet me back here in a second. Okay guys, so what we're going to do is for each part of the text, so paragraph 1 here, paragraph 2 to 3 here, and paragraph 4 here, we're going to work out what the focus is, and all you'll need to do is give a tick and a brief bullet point for each one that applies for that paragraph. So we're going to start thinking about the beginning. So first box, narrative perspective, filling in this one here. What do we know about the narrative perspective in paragraph 1? Well, we know that it is written in third person, so it talks about Strike, and it seems to be an omniscient narrator. Okay, so a kind of all-knowing, all-seeing, godlike narrator. Okay, so you would put in here third person perspective and focus on Strike. So character, well, yeah, key focus is Strike in there. Events, arrives at his office. Setting, arrival at his office. Atmosphere, I'm going to let you come up with some words that you think best fit that. I would go for enigmatic, you know, that word I talked about before, that sort of sense of not knowing everything, building up mystery. Okay, so you want just a bullet point or two in each box for that one. Have a go at filling that in now. Okay, so we're now going to have a look at our middle section, that's paragraphs 2 and 3. The major shift here is in character, so instead of having Strike, which we had in the first box, you need to change that to the man in the middle of the room. Okay, now tell me what events happen, what the setting is, so where are they, and how would you describe the mood or the atmosphere? Have a go at filling that one in now. Okay, and final one is the final couple of sentences, your denouement. We know that narrative perspective has remained the same, it's still written in the third person. The character focus here, tell me who it is that we are concentrating on, what event is happening, has the setting changed and has the mood changed? So fill those. So I keep shifting around on your screen, sorry to kind of freak you out with that. So we're now going to look at how you could answer a question on question 3, and I've written you some sentence starters to try and help talk you through how you would structure your answer for this. So paragraph number 1, you could use this sentence starter to write your first paragraph. You're aiming for roughly 3 paragraphs, one on the beginning of the extract or the exposition, one on the climax or middle part of the extract, and one on the final point, which is your denouement. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through now paragraph 1. At the beginning of the extract, the writer focuses our attention on ... You need to try and copy that down and finish off that sentence for me. I'll give you a clue. You know that the major character is the first character we're introduced to, so name him here. This makes the reader think, feel or imagine. Choose the word that you think fits best or notice that. Now tell me how you think the focus on this character makes the reader think. Okay, have a go at finishing that now. Right, so let's check our text, and we can see that the major focus is on Strike's character right at the start, and we can see that the purpose of this is to make the reader inquisitive or fascinated by the coming events. It is alluded to that there has been some sort of a conflict, and I would use the quote, 2 raised voices were reverberating through the glass door. And then I would go on to say, to explain that this immediately tells us that the focus of the character of Strike is experiencing confusion, and the reader shares that with his character as we wonder what the source of that conflict may be. So let's look back at our sentence starters here. At the beginning of the extract, the writer focuses our attention on Strike. This makes the reader think, feel or imagine or notice that. I would add in here, so it focuses our attention on Strike and his arrival at his office where he can clearly hear people arguing. You need to use your own evidence to support your point at this point here. So if I grab my highlighter, I'll show you where you need to add your evidence in. You need to add evidence here, okay? So this is the point where you need to find a quote. You need to introduce that quote and say what it shows us about Strike at this moment. Okay, it's just there. Pause the video, do that now. Okay, done? So your next step would be to complete your analysis by saying this makes the reader think, feel, imagine or notice that. So I would say that this makes the reader think about what might have been the cause of the conflict and anticipate some sort of argument or conflict to follow. You could, if you are aiming for full marks, use the phrase rising action and say the writer does this to give the text momentum and to create a sense of rising action. Okay, that's really high level if you can be talking about that now in year 7. So if you wish to add that in now. Pause the video. Okay, so we are now going to move on to paragraph number 2. So paragraph 1 beginning, paragraph number 2 is going to be based on the middle part of your extract there, and we're going to think about the writer's shift in focus here. So you already know that the major shift in focus is to the character of the man in the middle of the room, and I want you to think about what the purpose of that is. So why we shift from Strike as the detective arriving at his office to the man in the middle of the room. You may at this point want to go back to your extract now and look for the quote that you could use to explain what the focus is for the middle part of the extract. And what we can see is that we have the focus on the man in the middle of the room looking really dishevelled. So he looks a bit rough, he looks as if he hasn't looked after himself. And then we focus in the next paragraph on his mechanical movement and his strange behaviours. And if I was going to be choosing a quote for myself to prove what the focus is, I would probably choose a quote that exemplifies how he looks from paragraph 2 and something about his strange movements from paragraph 3. Choose your quotes now. We're going to have 2 for this because there are 2 big shifts here from the middle part of your extract. Highlight your quotes now and get ready to use those. Okay, so you should have selected your quotes and pause the video and be ready to hear the next bit. If you haven't done that, can you do that now? Okay, so hopefully this isn't ruining it for everyone. I would be selecting quotes like, personally, I think the animal stench hit the detective's nostrils to show that the focus is on the effect of the man in the middle of the room on Strike. And my second quote, I'm going to use a really simple one, just mechanical movement here. Okay, so okay, mechanical movement, yeah. So I would use those 2, animal stench that hit the detective's nostrils and mechanical movement. If you are stuck, you can use those. If you've got your own quotes and they're different, that's absolutely fine, okay? As long as it shows what is being focused on in the middle. Okay, so we're going to move back to the other slide now and talk through how you'd write that up. Right, people, so we are now looking at bullet point number 2. The writer then shifts the focus to the man in the middle of the room. You know that. This, again, is where you need to be adding in your evidence. So that goes here in your sentence write-up. So the writer then shifts the focus to the man in the middle of the room. Give me your quotes. The writer describes, so in my case, animal stench, and then the mechanical movement of this man. This makes the reader, and you're going to explain here what you think the purpose of that is. This makes the reader, and answer that bit now before I offer you any advice. Okay, so when you're explaining the effect here, this makes the reader, You want to get across the sense of the reader's journey from the middle of the extract, and so how have they developed their understanding from the starting point to the middle. So one of the things that I might say is that at the start of the extract, we were focused on the character of Strike, but in the middle of the extract, or the climax of the extract, our attention is shifted to the strange man in the middle of the room whom Strike is investigating or getting ready to speak to. And that the purpose of this seems to be to build up a sense of mystery or intrigue about that character, and to forewarn or prepare the audience for perhaps some sort of revelation that will come. We don't know what that will be, but we get an impression that we are building towards a significant moment of revelation. A revelation means where you learn something, where something is made clear. So I'm trying to use for you words like build, and you can see my keywords in this box here. Build, structures, shapes, constructs. These are the kind of words that when you write up your answer, if you can use some of these, you will pick up extra marks. Okay? So the more of these words you can use, the writer shapes, the passage, the writer structures, the writer builds, the writer constructs, the more impressive your answer will sound. Okay? So have a go at writing up your middle paragraph now. The writer then shifts the focus to the man in the middle of the room. Give me some evidence, talk about the quotes which show what the man in the middle of the room is like from paragraph 2 and 3. Then explain how this makes the reader think or feel, what it does for us. Develops intrigue about the character of the man in the middle of the room, forewarns or forebodes that some incident may happen, perhaps some sort of revelation. Okay, so complete that now. Right, so you're nearly done. Final paragraph here is going to be on the final part of the extract, okay? So we are going to be looking at the final bullet points here, say 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you're going to start your third paragraph, with our focus and switches 2. So what is the big shift that happens in the final paragraph? Let's get that back up and have a look now. So here we are, down here, for the final bit. You, him, said the burning-eyed man as his hand touched nose and chest again. You, Strike, you, the detective. Okay, so what is the big shift we see here? We've talked already, it's dialogue. We hear the voice of that burning-eyed man, the man in the middle of the room, for the first time. So we get a shift to the voice of the man in the centre of the room, and it's a shift from overall narration to dialogue, meaning speech from a You are beginning your paragraph number 3 with our focus then switches 2. Okay, that's bullet point 3 here. And you can complete that with the voice of the man in the middle of the room. He hasn't been given a name yet, so we can just call him the man in the middle of the room. This creates an atmosphere of. How would you complete that sentence? Have a go at doing it for yourself now. Okay, what did you come up with then? This creates an atmosphere of. You could have had answers like tension as we anticipate what he might be about to ask from Strike. You could say it almost immerses, that means it puts us into the scene as we are able to hear the voice of the man. So this creates an atmosphere of immersion in the scene. Okay, so you can think about how you want to express that. This creates an atmosphere of tension as we wonder what the voice of the man may go on to ask of Strike. It creates an atmosphere of, you could use the word immersion or immediacy, as if we can hear the events alongside Strike and sharing his anxiety about what might happen. The reader now understands is our next bullet point, and we're going to now talk about that. So complete your bullet point here, number 4. This creates an atmosphere of. Okay, so now we're going to look at the next bullet point. The reader now understands that. Okay, so let's have a think about what we understand by that final paragraph. I'm going to bring it up and we're going to go through that. Okay, so in our final paragraph it says, this bit here, you, him, said the bunny-eyed man, as his hand touched nose and chest again, you strike, you, the detective. What do we understand that we didn't understand before? Well, we understand that the man doesn't clearly know that this is definitely strike. He has to double check, you, him, you strike, you, the detective. In fact, he's triple checking. Is this man the man he thinks it is? What does this tell us? Well, it tells us that Strike has a reputation, that the man has heard of him, he seems to know of him, but doesn't know what he looks like. So this develops our understanding of the mystery of our original character. So the extract started with a focus on Strike, it shifted to our focus on the man in the middle of the room, and then we learn again something about Strike the detective, because we learn that he has a reputation. The man has heard of him, clearly thinks that he is the man for the job, whatever job that may be. So how does our understanding change and develop? We learn of Strike as a man of reputation, and we learn that the man in the middle of the room feels a desperate need to communicate with him, though he doesn't know what he looks like. So we are back to our bullet points here. The reader now understands that Strike, our original character, the detective, has built a reputation for himself that the man in the middle of the room feels he can trust. Something to that effect would be great. You need to write up your own answer there. So finish your sentence for yourself. You can use your own wording. And then we're going to tackle the final sentence. So the source ends with the dialogue of from the man in the middle of the room. You can put in a quote there. So in this instance, you are adding your quote at this point. The source ends with the voice of the man in the middle of the room. You can put in the quote, you strike, or you the detective, whatever you like best. And this makes the reader think, feel, or predict. You're going to choose the word that you think fits best. Think or feel or predict what you think will happen. Okay, so what do you think this makes the reader think, feel, or predict? Have a go at answering that one now. So you're writing up, you should have answered this bullet point, you're now on to the final one. You've put in a quote about the man and what he says, and you're now explaining how this makes the reader think what they feel or what they might predict will happen next. And I'm going to let you answer that one yourselves. Right, guys, now if you're anything like me, the way that you write these things up might be a little bit messy to begin with. So your job now will be to perfect your write-up of that answer. So you want to have 3 paragraphs in total, 1 on the beginning of the extract and what we're focusing on, 1 on the middle and 1 on the end. Okay, using those sentence starters that I gave you. If you're stuck, rewind the video, go back, rewatch those parts of the video until you're kind of satisfied with your answer. They don't have to be long paragraphs, they can be relatively short, but you must check that you've used a quote in each one. So you want to use your quote to prove your point, to back up your evidence that the extract really is focusing on what you say it is for each of those paragraphs. Okay, and then we're going to talk through the mark scheme and how I would mark this, and I'm going to ask you to grab your green pen and have a go at self-assessing where you think you are on here. Okay, so a word before we get going with your self-assessment. Obviously go grab your green pen now. I just wanted to recap for you. When the question is on structure, I'm hoping that you now understand that structure is not about sentence structures. That's part of your language question that we did in last lesson. Structure means the shape of the whole text. So how it moves from beginning to middle to end, exposition, climax, denouement. Okay, and we're looking for shifts and changes that the writer uses, and those can be in the perspective, that is used, the focus on a character, the focus on a setting, or the shift in the mood and atmosphere that seems to occur. Okay? So your question 3 mark scheme we're now going to go through together. So you can see here that there are 4 levels and it's a total of 8 marks. 8 marks would be for like your perfect answer. So this is where we're aiming. Look, most of my year 11s would struggle still to get a full mark answer on a question number 3, and this is really tough. This is probably the hardest lesson that you've had so far. For those of you that need challenge, hopefully it's enabled you to step up to that. Those of you that have found this hard, please do not worry. This is a really difficult question. It's also really alien because you've probably never analysed the overall structure of a text before. So please don't worry if you found this hard, okay? I would probably guess that a lot of you are going to hit somewhere between a 2 and a 3. And I'm going to talk you through now how you would get into a level 4 answer. So if you are aiming for high marks here, we know that you are aiming to be detail perceptive and really analytical in what you say. So I'm looking for detail perceptive understanding of structural features. I'm looking for you to analyse the effects of the writer's choice of features, structural features. So if I was marking really harshly and I was looking at one of my year 11 answers, the sort of things that my top mark students would be saying would be that they would have identified that there is a shift not only from strike in the beginning paragraph to the man in the middle of the room in paragraphs 2 and 3, but they might have also said, to capture more detail in their answer, that is a movement from outside, so he's outside the office, to inside as the narration narrows in on the man in the middle of the room. Okay? Now that is what we would call detailed and perceptive because, again, like I've said in previous questions, the higher mark answers don't say one thing. They aim to say 2 different things about a particular quote or a particular moment in the story. Okay, so you'd be telling me that it shifts from strike to the man in the middle of the room, but you'd also be telling me that this is a movement from outside the office to the inside of the office, and that this heightens the tension. Okay, it's as if we're narrowing in, almost like the camera is zooming in on the key characters there. So the most perceptive answers for your level 4 will be finding 2 things to say about any one event in the story. Alright? Now, next point. If you have used evidence, that's brilliant. You need a quote per paragraph. If you've done that, you're probably making a clear, relevant explanation, possibly even a detailed or perceptive analysis. If you didn't manage to use enough quotes, your job now is going to be to get your green pen, go back over your work and find some quotes to add in green pen. Okay, so have a go at doing that now if you haven't managed it. Those of you that did manage it, incredibly well done. Your job now is to see if you could add 2 things that you could say about any one of those quotes. So when I'm saying say 2 things about it, I mean 2 things about why the writer focuses on that in that part of the text. Right, so your final task for today is going to be to have a go at grading your own answer in your green pen and giving yourself your what went wells and your even better ifs. Where possible, you want to take those from the mark scheme here, but I'm going to give you some verbally that you might add down. So you may, for example, have had a what went well that you rate in 3 paragraphs about the beginning, middle and end of the extract. You may have the what went well of I used evidence to back up my points in each paragraph. And you may have had that what you did well was to try and comment on more than one thing for each of those quotes or parts of the text. Okay? For your even better if, You may have that you need to use more quotes to back up your answers. You may need to say that you need to try and aim to say more than one thing about each of your quotes. And you may need to say that you need to use all 3 paragraphs and structure your answer from beginning to middle to end. Okay guys, now that was a lot of work, so get all of that down in green pen and I'll meet you back for our recap. Right, so here we are back at the beginning again, and here were our objectives. We were trying to analyse the structure of the extract and the writer's reasons for structuring the extract that way. Hopefully you feel that you achieved that. We're also looking with Sasson at identifying and analysing shifts, which means the changes in focus in the extract, and exploring the writer's intentions. Again, hopefully you feel that you have achieved those objectives this lesson. This is a really, really tough lesson. You will probably never have analysed an extract for structure in this way before. You may well think that structure means sentence structures, and as I said earlier, that is actually part of a question 2 on language. So if I ask you to analyse language, I'm talking about words, the methods a writer uses, and also sentence structures, so those key 3 things. But for a question on structure, we are looking at the overall shape of a piece of writing and how the paragraphs are sequenced and how the shift in focus occurs and why. This was tough stuff. I hope you feel that you've learned something from it. Again, don't worry if you found this hard. Just give it your best shot. You may well need to replay this video and go check out parts from earlier in the lesson to make sure you really understand everything. Hopefully you feel you've learned something. Again, missing you all massively. It's just not the same thing delivering these videos to my blank wall. Okay, let me know how you're getting on. Give me some messages on Show My Homework, please. All right, take care of yourselves. Bye.